Right, welcome to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast. Brodie on FDJ Nouvelle Aquitaine Futuroscope, both this year, next year as well. A team, I would say, on the rise, some big signings for 2022 and already some good results and some strong riders in 2021. We're going to talk about the World Championships women's parkour, or what we know of it for 2022, given that we're both Australian. I'm not sure if Brodie's going back or not, but Brodie, I understand you're going down to Calpe Denia, wherever everybody seems to be right now for team camp tomorrow.
Yeah, so leave tomorrow and head down south. In the past, our team has always trained in Cambrils in Tarragona, but this is the first year that we're heading down that way. So I'm actually not 100% sure where we're staying, but I'm looking forward to new roads for me anyway.
Where is the best place you've trained? I think you've trained a lot in Brisbane, where I've trained. In fact, we figured out before we started recording that we'd actually been on a training ride together back in like 2015, 16, which
I know,
was
so
kind of
good.
mind-blowing. Obviously, Brodie's cycling career's gone in one direction, mine's gone in the other. But yeah, where do you prefer to train?
Look, I really actually liked training in Austria.
Oh, okay.
When we had the Innsbruck World Champs, and I don't know if it's just a good time of my life or like I really love the mountains, but I just have really good memories from training in and around Innsbruck. Also, where I grew up, Mount Glorious in Brisbane, it's very, very hilly and like a subtropical rainforest, and so except for the pretty disrespectful drivers in Queensland, I would say that that's one of my favourite places to train as well. And of course, Girona. There's a reason everyone lives here and trains here. It's because there's endless options. I still rode a brand new road yesterday, and I feel like I'm someone who always does a different loop every day, kind of thing. So, yeah.
It's crazy how many, like you, Nick Schultz when he was back, Seb Berwick, all do like the Go Track Nebo Glorious Loop. Or, yeah, it's fantastic. But yeah, Andorra, definitely noticed the difference in driver attitudes in Andorra since I came, which is a good thing. But world champs next year, Wollongong. I'm not sure how many slots Australia will have. The course is 176 kilometers, I believe, which is one of maybe the longest ever, and a fair bit of climbing in it too. Have you done, or are you familiar with that area? Have you done like Mount Kira or that sort of punchy hills around there?
Yeah, I guess I'm still kind of waiting for the UCI to affirm everything, because I have heard, like, to be honest, as an Australian rider, we didn't really have any idea.
Okay.
Even right, kind of knew someone there within the course, like we didn't have any idea until everyone else found out as well. Yeah, I'm waiting for like the full confirmation from the UCI to know exactly what the demands are. But I actually spent the last probably 2 off seasons around Sydney because my boyfriend's from there, so I lived there briefly. And so yeah, I'm actually kind of familiar with that area. I have some friends in Wollongong, and there's a famous bunch ride that heads out that way, Saturday Calypsy. And so I'm a little bit familiar with the roads around Helensburgh, down like along the coast on the Seacliff Bridge, which is pretty cool that's being included. It's super iconic, like New South Wales cycling. And I have done Mount Kira, I think twice. I was out there on a training ride and did my first ever strength eats on Mount Kira. And I was like, what are these? What is this low cadence? But that's my memory of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think my opinion on it is I'm pretty excited. I had heard swirling rumors that it was going to be like a sprinter's course, and I'm like, oh man, I'd like it. There's so many really nice climbs around there. It'd be good if they included something. So that's cool to see, and I think it's kind of a little bit reminiscent of, from what I recall, of like Geelong Worlds having Shilambra and then, a bit of a distance into the finish. So like it leaves it open to, it still could be like a small sprint. It could be a solo rider. Reminds me a bit of Classica San Sebastian, to be honest, which I love this year. Yeah, that kind of race is exciting. It's many options.
Yeah, I was hoping for a home-cooked parkour for Caleb Ewan in the men's race. I was like, just make it pancake flat, but they didn't. And I think the Australian bias aside, there's a lot of merit to having a mixed parkour like this, both in the men and women's, to give a variety of riders options. Like, is it going to be Vollering, or is it going to be Vos? Is it too hard for Vos? Is it too hard for Balsamo? Is it where someone like Nuvia Doma and Ludwig on FDJ on your team comes in? Is it too hard for Grace Brown? Has she got an opportunity to go solo? So yeah, it's definitely more interesting it's going to be better than to watch than a sprint. Even though.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I also was like, well, of course they'll make it for Caleb, thinking he's from that area, but
Yeah.
I hope he has a good race anyway, and I reckon that the home crowd, home feeling always gives you a few extra watts anyway, so maybe that'll get him over the climbs. But yeah, either which way, I think people are going to start really mulling over now, like, how do we prepare for this race, and what sort of strategy do we go in with, and what sort of riders do we bring, and yeah, I think that we've seen in recent years, like with the women's peloton and the men's peloton, that sprinty riders are fit enough and strong enough to get over these climbs. I mean, yeah, Flanders wasn't Leuven wasn't exactly flat, but yeah, it's gonna sting. It's gonna sting Wollongong, I reckon.
Do you, speaking of strategy, Olympics, then World Championships, the Dutch didn't win despite having like 4 of the top 5 favourites. Was that just random luck? Was that nothing to do with what the other teams did, and it was more to do with their dysfunction? Or do you think there is a way to beat them by, I guess, almost other nations pairing up, where a Grace Brown attacks or you attack, and Elise Shabby also attacks with you, and an Italian comes with you, and then you almost gang up on the Dutch themselves? Is that a way to beat them, or was it just random occurrences and AVV will still be a heavy favourite on a course like that next year?
Yeah, I mean, you can never discount Annemiek. She's one of the strongest in the world. So I don't know. I mean, I personally see it as like the Dutch is a team full of winners, and from other nations' perspective, I guess everyone races against the Dutch. Wait for the Dutch to attack. Wait till they do this. If there's a Dutch rider, which is kind of a little bit negative racing. But I wasn't in the Worlds this year. I was injured, so I got to watch it on TV. But from what I could see, it appeared that like the Dutch and the Italians actually both had a completely different strategy, and they were first and second. So, I mean, the Italians went all in with a really, really strong team structure, and initially there was one point where Elisa Longoborghini was in a move and she wasn't rolling through, and everyone's like, what's going on? As if she couldn't win from this. And it's like they had this plan and they fully 100% backed Balsamo. And, Vos was there, and the Dutch did attack. They did attack a lot, and I guess that has traditionally worked for them in the past. Like, they've got the strongest riders, they can attack, and then one of them can get away. I mean, Chantel, and then you have Annemiek and Anna. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a matter of other teams really working as a unit, because the truth of the matter is the Dutch on paper do have like the individual strongest riders who can just ride away from the rest of the field. But what they do seem to lack is that complete unison. And you can understand why. Everyone really could be a winner. So the way the other teams, I think, need to dismantle them is to create a really good team plan, team strategy. And it worked for the Italians. So yeah, taking notes,
Going away from the world champs back to women's world tour, but sort of similar riders we're mentioning that are the difficult ones to beat, like Vos, like a Vollering, like Van Vleuten. You've got FDJ have Grace Brown coming in. I was kind of surprised to see it, the Australian, into FDJ next year. I would say top 5 one-day rider in the world, conservative. I think she's definitely top 5. Maybe if you look at Brabant's Liège, and then again this year, you've now got yourself, her, Ludwig, Cavalli, Farlin. Do you think with AVDB retiring, and I know they got Vas, I know they got others coming in, but you can't replace AVDB. It's like generational talent. What do you think? Does that just give you more options, given that Grace likes to attack? And often it's been Cecilia having to, like, she has to attack because she can't beat Vos in a sprint, but then if she doesn't get away, and then she's tied for the sprint. But actually, I think she won an uphill sprint this year. In a women's world tour race as well. How do you think that changes things, Grace, coming into the team?
I definitely think it just gives us options. Like, the women's world tour calendar is bigger next year. We do have more demanding stage races, so you're going to need to kind of, I guess, strategize how you use the riders throughout the year, when they're going to be peaking, when they're going to be resting. So, I mean, in our team, yeah, Scylla has been quite an obvious leader, and there has been a lot of, she's taken that leadership role on really well. But you're right, like if she attacks, everyone's like, it's a threat, but then she might not 100% be like, guaranteed in the sprint. So I think having someone like Grace, and also now you've seen the strength of Marta, is that we do have these options. And so it's going to be a matter of like, well, she could win. So it's not like everyone's going to be all eyes on Sealy, nullifying everything she does. So, plus we do have a more extensive calendar. So it'll give each leader the opportunity to probably rest and like really peak for a race, rather than going into every kind of big race with the pressure on their shoulders.
Evita Muzic, 22. You've got the Tour de France Femme of Zwift coming in next year, some of the longest climbs we see all year. Is Muzic, do you reckon she seems to be a pretty good climber? She won this year, won a Giro Rosa stage last year. Does she go for polka dots? Are people already thinking about what they're doing with, all these questions are coming up with the TDFF next year that haven't been asked before of, okay, well, like, there's probably a lot of exposure and prestige in getting the polka dots, like which riders, and I'm thinking which riders who aren't AVV, aren't Vos, aren't Vollering can go for that, and like she seems to be a name there, or does she win from the break? I don't know. Where do you see like her strengths next year? Is she ready to step up at like a Liège, Bastogne-Liège even?
Yeah, I mean, Evita is an incredibly strong rider, and she's quite mature in her approach. I mean, I think FDJ saw her talent from quite a young age, and they wanted to kind of foster that. And you see a lot of young riders be like thrown into the spotlight, like, what are they going to win? Next big thing. But I have to say, to the credit of the team and also her own attitude, is that she's really like developed slowly at her own pace. I mean, not slowly as in like, yeah, you know what I mean? She's not like forced into leadership because she's got an inkling of, talent, but she's extremely talented. She's a very good teammate too. There are plenty of races this year where she's been working hard for Scylla, even though like probably she could have been in that front group. So that's really nice to see as well. And yeah, she enjoys climbing. She's happy. She's quite skilled as well. So she's raced some cyclocross in the past. So she's absolutely able to be there on those crazy descents. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens at the Tour de France. Like, I don't actually know any clue who our team is going to be yet. And I also, don't know what sort of leadership approach we go into it with, but I highly imagine that Evita will be there, and she'll be definitely looking for stage wins or a GC position. I mean, I'd love to see that, especially as a French rider. It's means a lot.
And going to yourself now, this year, I think the best result was 6th at San Sebastian, hilly, like one of the most hilly races actually on the calendar. Next year, as you said, there's even more. And like Norway, I think Norway had a proper mountaintop finish this year as well, which Van Vleuten won. Your role this year, what was it? Mostly domestique work in races, and do you 100%?
100%. Yeah.
And do you see that changing next year?
I'd like to have the opportunity, yeah, because I feel like I'm not someone who can half be a domestic and half be a leader. I either want to know that I'm going to have the opportunity to win and have that focus, or I'm going to 100% ride for the girl on my team who I think can win. I'm not likely to be like, I'll work a little bit less or cover one less attack and then try and get like a top 15. Like, that doesn't bring me joy. I want to be satisfied at the end of the race, and I want to be satisfied with either my role as a domestic or my role as a leader. So yeah, at times I guess I feel, if I look back on my data from some of those races, or like how, Liège, Bastogne-Liège, for example, some of the races in like Durango, I was floating. I had some of the best races of my year, and I probably, had I just been like the leader, I would have gotten further through the race, but that's not the point of a team. We have someone like Scylla who is super consistent, a podium getter, and she has won some races. So it's like, I think I can do a really good job for her, and I know that I'm strong enough and willing enough to do what's required. But yeah, I certainly miss the feeling of being able to try and win. Like, and even if it was like, okay, Brodie, you have like one chance, like to try and get a result, then it's like, you know, everything's on you for this one race. And yeah, like I've tried to get away in breaks a few times. And for example, I have been represented in the break and then Silla's come across or something like that. But yeah, you pretty much haven't seen it on TV. So unfortunately, I feel a little bit overlooked a lot of the time because yeah, you don't see what we do in races. You don't see what the domestic does. You don't see which breakaways I was in, for example. Like the TV turns on after like the leaders have caught. That's it.
Yeah.
And then you have pro cycling stats to look at, which yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd like to be a leader, but I'm also not gonna fight for leadership when there's someone who's more capable of winning, if you know what I mean.
Well, as you said, there's more races coming onto the calendar, World Tour races, where teams are going to have to go outside their typical 1 or 2 leaders just to spread it around. Like Tour de Romandie, for example, I assume 3-day stage race next year, I assume that's going to have a hilly stage in it or a mountainous stage. Might even have a mountaintop finish. Like, does it, you know, that's sort of around the same before the Tour de France. It's just, I expect different riders to be going to those sort of races and getting chances, which is good.
Which is what we need. Like, I think, you know, my opinion on breakaways in women's cycling. So there are a lot of kind of debates over like women's cycling never has any breaks. It's so boring. And why does everyone just wait? And then also it's like random breakaway. It's really exciting and crazy and the break wins. Like it seems like there's these two extremes. There's not this pattern that you have in men's cycling. And I think the reason for that is that traditionally women's cycling is still, you know, very young and it's not been emphasized to riders to be in the breakaway's importance. Like it's not on TV, you're not getting visibility for your team. And so like why, and our races aren't super long. So why would you be in the break and then get caught and get 75th when you could kind of hang in there and maybe get like 26th?
Yeah.
Which what you see sometimes happening. And then because the truth of the matter is like teams or prospective sponsors will look at pro cycling stats or will look at the results and be like, oh yeah, you know, she was a top 20 in that race. And that is more likely to get you somewhere than, you know, being a domestic and being in every breakaway and then finishing way down the back. But that is changing now because we've seen people taking risks in breakaways and then breakaways winning, breakaways being on TV, you know, talent being spread. So I think that's what's really exciting is that, hold on, wait a minute. Now the teams are saying everyone has, you know, we have to be in the breakaway because they're winning races now. And yeah, I'm not quite sure where I went on that tangent for, but I felt like it was important.
Well, I agree. There's a few this year that stuck out in my mind. The first one was Cursina at Burgos, who won by like a minute in the first stage of Burgos. And then there was Faulkner in Norway and Reusser as well. I think Reusser was in a break with Rivera and one from the break. And it's like, well, Reusser, not the punchiest, not the greatest sprint, but a great time trialist. So going in the break is going to be her best option probably, and she's really strong. So yeah, it's definitely changed. I take your point. Like Simon Pello was on Androni. He won the Giro award for most Ks in the break. It's not an actual award. It was, and he just went in the breakaway on days where he had no chance of winning. He got a Trek contract, like a 2-year deal.
Yeah,
which now I think he's actually quite good. And if he applied himself into breaks in stages, he could actually win. He could do better. But the point is, he didn't prove he could win races at all and got a Trek deal because it's on TV, because they could see him on TV.
Yeah.
I put, you know, suicide breaks. But next year, the Tour de France will have 2.5 hours coverage. But I think half an hour might be like post game or 15 pre-game, 15 post-game. 2 hours, so 2 hours coverage. Definitely. What's the minimum you think? Because like even Paris-Nice or Dauphiné, I think they kick in for like 2.5 hours. I think anything less than 2 hours, you are really risking missing stuff.
Yeah, I guess women's, like our races are like anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5 hours. So yeah, for sure, anything less than 2 hours, you know, there is a lot going on. Like, you know, you do see the kind of cream of the crop rise towards the back end of the race, and then you're like, well, how did this group form? Like, how did this happen? What's the race situation? And I mean, I watched a lot of cycling and I enjoy it, and I want to know how the race went down. And I remember like the person in the break and what they did. So I would love for other people to watch our sport and have the same kind of excitement, because there's also races I've been in that have had absolutely zero coverage. Like, you're lucky if there's even a tweet about it, but they're being so dynamic and so exciting, and like the way that the winner got there is the whole story. I mean, that's why cycling is an exciting sport. So yeah, and I think now teams are hiring riders who are like, there seems to be a little bit more of a, the riders who are going to be in the break in women's cycling. I mean, you see riders like Elise Shabby, Taylor White, like I try to get in there myself. Neve Fisher-Black's quite present in the break, like that kind of, when you look at those riders, you're like, okay, like, yeah, that's going to be the break. But then, they are getting further through. So like, we've seen Shabby get some podium results from being in the breakaway and being aggressive, even if she's, technically riding for her leader, Cassia or something like that. So now I think directors and like teams are like, all right, we're going to need this kind of rider because it's important for our sport. And that's good, because it does open opportunities for different types of riders.
It's important primarily, I think, defensively. Like, Shabby gets in the break, or Neve Fisher-Black, for your example. Neve Fisher-Black gets in the break and a Trek rider doesn't get in the break at Liège or a big one-day race. SD Works now no longer have to chase. And just defensively, it's really, really important to be represented in the break. And yeah, it's getting more and more important. If you don't, not in the break, like, but then it depends, is Neve Fisher-Black good enough to win from the break? If the break stays away, probably yes.
Yeah, it depends on the finish then, isn't it? Right? Yeah. It's like, well, like for example, in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, like I absolutely love that race to pieces, so I'm going to talk about it a lot. But there was a moment where I was like, so yeah, it wasn't on TV, but basically I attacked. I was alone for a bit on a climb, and then the typical breakaway riders joined me, and we had a really good working group.
Yeah.
But Liv missed the break, and they rode it back. Yeah, it wasn't long. Like we didn't even get to La Redoute, but Liv were quite absent in the break, and in the previous years in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, maybe people looked at each other and like the teams missed it, like our team missed it 2 years ago, and then now it's just like, no, we can't let that happen.
Yeah.
So, but then yeah, because that wasn't on TV, then there was like Neve Fisher-Black actually attacked again out of that break, so she was already in that one, and then she attacked again once we got caught. So it's like, wow, you can see how amazing she really is. Like, she was already in a breakaway, and like, I mean, I had the same situation in La Course. Like, so I think it's super important that, I mean, you see the whole race, and of course every rider, like I'm talking from my own perspective, like what I did was so heroic, but like you remember your own race.
Yeah.
And when someone asks you how the race went, you're going to be like, here's the story, not like, yeah, I was 52nd. Like,
yeah.
So.
Well, I remember things like Marco Haller doing something randomly in the middle of Tour of Flanders, or Ashley Moorman-Passio, I'm not sure where she ended up coming in Liège, but like attacking on the second to last climb, and like I remember that, and it was important for the race. But speaking of SD Works, who do you think is going to be the top dogs? They were top dogs again this year. Do you think, are they more I think they're more vulnerable next year. I know Vas is now there, and she's a gun, and I think Kopecki's going to SD Works, isn't she? No,
yeah.
Kopecky and Reusser. So
Kopecky, yeah. Look, they're still a force to reckon with. I think obviously Wollongong has really stepped into the like Anna van der Breggen role quite well, and I know she doesn't love to be constantly compared to Anna, which is totally fair enough. But as far as leadership opportunities go, I think they'll be racing for Demi a lot. Kopecky, she's not just a pure sprinter, so that just gives them options. They're a little bit of a quick step in that way, that you're like, who could win?
I think Kopecky will win more than Wollongong next year. I think
she's such a fast finisher. It's insane. But yeah, you have like Marlon Roycer there, who's just an absolute diesel, and Chantel, I think, is still racing up in the spring.
Yeah.
So we saw her start off the season last year winning Strade Bianche, which was incredibly inspiring, I have to say, to see a rider like Chantel win. She was in the breakaway, and then the breakaway splintered, and then she won from that, more or less. So that was pretty cool as well. She was just the strongest rider.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be cool on SD Works to see like some of the younger riders. Like obviously Neve Fisher-Black is incredibly talented, and she does always ride for her leaders really well. And then also Blanca Vas, I think she's going to be so good to watch. She's so incredible.
Yeah, they got a lot of options, but AVDB, the thing is, AVDB she was willing to be 100% domestique in the course and Liège in the final. And I'm thinking, okay, out of Vollering and Kopecky, who's going to do that if they're in a finish that suits Kopecky? Because Kopecky does climb pretty well. And that's something I'm waiting to see what happens there. So I feel like Trekker, definitely, they've been on the up. They got Balsama coming over. You now have consolidated with Grace Brown coming over. So there's a lot of other, there's just a lot of strong teams cropping up now. And do you think there's space for more teams at the moment, or do you think it's pretty well balanced now?
I think it's at this point in time, it's pretty well balanced. I mean, you do have a really good dispersion of talent, and that's going to be really interesting to watch. Plus, you have more world tour teams who are, much more supported, and the riders can fully focus on being professional riders. I mean, it's hard to explain how much not having enough money really affects your life as a pro athlete. So I think it might not be obvious to the naked eye, but the fact that you have riders who are getting paid enough to live and survive and enhance themselves as athletes will make a big difference to not the girls who are already good, but everyone else as well. It's just the professionalism is just going up, and you do have a good amount of riders on different teams. Plus, you have other kind of pro Conti teams, I guess they're called, pro teams, with up and coming riders and some talent. So it's exciting. I like that our sport is constantly and rapidly changing. It's only improving. That's a cool thing to be part of.
It's growing faster than the men's.
Yeah.
And it's changing faster than the men's. And that's why when I put up a women's video, I'm I have no idea how well this will do. It can, and then it constantly surprises me. And even I looked at my videos for the women's races this year, and I had my forecasts for it, and I was, it rapidly, I think I projected 25, 30K average per video, and they averaged a lot more than that. They averaged 80 to 90,000 views. I guess there was the Amstel outlier, but that's a lot of views for men or women's race just for a highlight video. So definitely, although no one's ever spoken to me about it, definitely there's a way to package it. And I don't think necessarily there needs to be a huge focus on copying the men's. Yes, you need good quality coverage of a minimum length. You need good prize money. You need riders having, constantly focusing on improving wages and having a livable wage as a minimum. That's a minimum. That's not even the goal. But otherwise, I think there needs to be a focus on how can we make this the best product possible. Not the men's race. Half the stuff in men's world tour is terrible and should not be copied, the structures and systems, etc. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We've got an opportunity, a unique opportunity to kind of improve on what's kind of already exists from men's cycling, but you have to adapt it and change it, to make it, like you said, it's got to be a good media package at the end of the day. That is how our sport exists, is through sponsors who want to get visibility through media. And so, women's cycling doesn't maybe follow as much of a pattern as men's cycling, and as I feel like sports fans, they like a little bit of predictability. They want to know the characters. They want to know who's going to be in the break. You want to understand how the riders are, but we haven't, our sport hasn't been visible for that long for fans to really get to know that. And that's what is going to improve. It's going to be a catalyst for more people watching the sport if you can predict a little bit more just who's going to be there, who's going to be doing what, which riders are the winners, and that's up to the media to then emphasize and create those characters for the fans. I mean, for example, when I didn't watch road cycling and flick it on TV, I'd be what is this sport? I don't know anyone understand, and there was a sprint, okay. But when you understand the game, it really is just this really strategic game. and you suddenly know all the riders, and you're like, oh, it's so good to see him in the break. Or like, I can't believe he won. He did this last time. And like, so that's what women's cycling will develop and what it does need to kind of keep those fans engaged, to keep coming back. So yeah, I think it's just like unknown. Like you said, you might be like, what's going to happen in this race? We don't quite know yet, but that's also exciting.
I think the TDF next year will be huge because I'm glad it's not on the same. I'm fully opposed to same day races, men and women races. I think Paris-Roubaix this year is the best ever example of how much hype can be built for it on the women's race standing on its own day. And maybe there's higher logistics costs, I think there would be, than having it on the same day, but it gives the women's race space to breathe. It means it can be on at the same time in the day, a better viewing slot. And that's what I think La Course has suffered from sometimes. Like La Course, you put it on the same day as stage one of the TDF in the morning, it's tough.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really considered that, I suppose. I guess I'm not so often watching the women's races. I'm in them, so yeah. I'm back and watch the men's racing when I'm not racing, or in the hotel room afterwards.
Because broadcasters and journalists, they have a limited number of people, and I know I'm on the tiny end of the scale. When I have just the women's race on that day, I can put everything into it. We can do full, good pods, spend time on it. When you've got two races, men or women's, like when Paris-Nice and Tirreno overlap, I hate it. And I think they cannibalize each other as well. So it's just more of a race overlap thing. That's just if we're getting bugbears off our chest, that's my bugbear of the day.
I understand the point. I'm gonna think about that now. When I run the race, I'll consider that.
All right, Brodie, last thoughts from you. What races do you think next year we need to look out for you? Again, Classica San Sebastian, got to be a lock for that. Liège, again, surely. Flèche, I reckon top 10. Depends how that race, Flèche.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to be like, I'm going to be a leader at these races. Sure, for me, my goals, I'll be going into like Strade Bianche. I love that race also. Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Flèche Wallonne, San Sebastian, because I guess this year, like, it was a really cool race. It was the first time I'd done it, but we didn't have the whole peloton there because it was also during the Olympics. Will
you be in Australia?
Hey?
Will you be in Australia then?
Next year? I'll be in Australia.
Next year for Worlds.
Wait, when is it next year? I don't even know when it is.
Well, Classica's in August, isn't it? It's after the tour. No, it's in July. It depends how long you go to, like, before the World Champs in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, I got to get selected for Worlds first. That's the thing. It's a battle. I got to get selected for Worlds, and then I have to be injury-free and healthy going into Worlds. But I reckon I would probably go back, ideally, early September, because it takes about 2 weeks for you to feel properly good and then train. That'd be sweet because I haven't been there in ages. But yeah, those races I'm looking forward to. I'm certainly looking forward to, gosh, it's hard to think off the top of my head, but just I'm really looking forward to more stage racing. I mean, we've got a couple of races in Spain, which I really like. Obviously the Tour de France, now that the park balls have been released, I'm just super pumped for it. So, I want to work hard enough to prove that I can get selected for that race out of my team as well. Regardless of what my role is, I want to go to the Tour de France.
Yeah, it'll be huge.
I just think it's cool that we're going to have like more racing in England again. With the Ride London Classic is now going to be like a stage race. I think it's not just a grip. It's just cool riding in England. I like riding in different places and experiencing different crowds and different roads and hard racing there. So I just like racing, so I look forward to it all. Anything can happen.
I know, and if this was technically possible, which I doubt it is, I reckon they should put on like Cadell's or Race Torquay or TDU like a month before Worlds or 3 weeks before Worlds. It's the best time ever to do it. People would be so hyped.
It seems like there've been, again, rumours flying about it, and then I hear from one person that's like, no, absolutely not, they shut it down, and someone else is like, oh, it might still happen. I guess logistically and like budget wise, it's probably really quite difficult to organise those races. But it would make sense if they had enough time to do that. It would make sense to get riders pumped for Australia. I really hope those races go ahead next year. I mean, sorry, 2023. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
I know. That's what's crazy. Like it'll be like by the time they happen in 2023, fingers crossed, it'll be like 3 years or something since they previously happened, like in their full incarnation. So that's why I was like, TDUs, that's too much. But Race Torquay, I don't know. It's a 1-day race. Yeah, surely there's going to be something to feel like. Even the Bay Crits.
Yeah, the Bay Crits would be so good.
Just rent out a car park somewhere in industrial estate, and you have like the whole world tour peloton doing it.
Oh my gosh, that'd be kind of carnage, but also super fun. Like I think it'd be so good if Cadell's races on before then, because I mean, I guess less so for the women, but like you got Shallambra in it, and the men go up Shallambra multiple times, and it's 10Ks from the finish, which is not dissimilar to
it's
Wollongong.
very similar.
So that's kind of going to give a good idea of people's form and stuff. But I mean, if they could do that, it'd be great. I think it'd be a little bit difficult for European teams to get their head around like the racing that's also, that they've kind of promised themselves to in Europe.
Yeah.
Plus there is racing after Worlds a lot of the time. So I think a lot of them have got to figure it out. But it's going to be cool to have everyone come to Australia. Like even when I was first on FDJ and the French girls came to Cadell's, I was just like, this is so cool. You get to like be, this is where I'm at.
I can't wait to go back.
Just be careful. People aren't super nice. I know I've brought that up twice now, but it's true. Unfortunately.
It is. I was like, when I was riding here with a couple of guys on teams, and they're just like taking two abreast in the full lane, and they were just chilling. I was like, oh, is this what it's like here? Because I was like, oh, shouldn't we like get in the hard shoulder and in all the rubbish?
Yeah, the Catalan drivers here are so nice. Like when I first came here,
it's crazy.
Like, oh man, I'm gonna get like some abuse hurled at me, and they're gonna like sit right up the back, but they just chill and they wait for you, and then they go around and then they give you a wave, and you're like, right on. But in Australia, truck drivers hate you a lot of the time. So that's the truth. I've been called so many terrible names by drivers. I'm like, what's your problem? You're pretty angry by the looks of it.
Hopefully Worlds will change some attitudes when people see how big cycling is. So hopefully that will happen. I mean, Geelong was certainly good for Australian cycling.
True.
Hopefully it's a catalyst for that.
Like Wollongong locals will probably, I mean, I reckon they probably resent it a little bit to start with, but once they see the hype, it's interesting how much a cycling race in a town can really change your attitude. Like I saw it first in Innsbruck World, so that was my first World Championship, and I was there a fair bit, staying with some friends and riding around and going to cafes. And we met this couple who owned a cafe, and they'd not ever been into cycling before. And we were in there every day, and not long after they like got a bike, and like he messaged me and like I got a bike, and then now they're just like, how cycling takes over your life. Like that is he does. He lives for it now, and that's just one example.
Adelaide.
Hey?
Adelaide, I think is the best place to ride in Australia.
It is good.
Like in terms of culture.
Very true.
So
I was just in the Algarve region of Portugal.
Oh yeah.
Just for a little training camp, and it kind of reminded me of Adelaide. I stayed in Portimao, and then you have to kind of ride out in some less savoury roads to get to the hills, and then there was just so many options everywhere. Like no wonder they have a race there.
Yeah.
Women's race. That'd be sick.
That would be good. I mean, Algarve, Volta Alentejo, pretty good races, and I also watched the Grandissima, which is a pretty funny race, the Volta of Portugal. But yeah, I can't wait for Worlds. Maybe we'll probably cross paths if I'm in Girona at some point. I got to go down and say hi to a few people, but I really want to go back to Australia for Worlds.
Yeah, for sure. You got to cover it for sure.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Brodie, for coming on. Lots of interesting stuff from you. And we wish you the best of luck for 2022 and even your training camp coming up. So best wishes from LRCP. We'll be following closely.
Thanks so much. I appreciate coming on.